It's well known that car companies don't always find customers. This causes that car company to lose money and eventually go bust. You may think that this doesn't happen much, but it really does. And so today I'll be talking about the car companies that didn't have the same success as others. The car companies that went defunct. Today's first manufacturer is one that I reckon is somewhat recognizable. That's right, it's Daewoo. The company began in 1937, although not with its more well-known name. Instead, it was known as National Motor, although not for long. After changing its name multiple times, the company was bought by the Daewoo conglomerate in 1982 and thus became Daewoo Motors. Before the company was renamed for the last time, the only cars produced by it were rebadged Opels as a result of a joint venture with General Motors. For example, there was the Royale series of flagship saloons, all based on the Opel Rekord E. The first Daewoo branded vehicle was the Le Mans, based on the Opel Kadett E. The Le Mans is one of Daewoo's most iconic models, as it was sold worldwide under various different names. Daewoo would also offer rebadged cars from other companies, not just GM. This includes the Venette, a rebadged Nissan Venette. In 1990, the first Daewoo car to have an original design was launched, the Espero Saloon, designed by Bertone. Daewoo gained a sister brand in 1991, that being Daewoo Heavy Industries, or DHI for short, which specialized in commercial vehicles. Cars that come from DHI include the Tico, a rebadged Suzuki Alto, and the Damas minivan, also a rebadged Suzuki. In 1992, Daewoo became an independent company following the end of the joint venture with GM. Not long before the turn of the millennium, Daewoo overhauled their range, introducing new authentic vehicles that weren't based on any pre-existing models. These include the Lanos, the Matiz, and the Leganza. During this time, Daewoo was seeking to invest in other car companies and would eventually gain a share of the Ukrainian manufacturer Avtozaz, as well as start a joint venture with Polish car maker FSO. The latter would result in the Polonez Caro, a car not just important to Poland, but also to me, as I'm of Polish descent. But I digress. Another investment that Daewoo pulled off was acquiring SsangYong, which had run into financial trouble after the Asian financial crisis of 1997. The acquisition of SsangYong would result in Daewoo integrating the company's lineup into its own. This would be short-lived, however, as Daewoo would soon sell the company after running into financial difficulties itself. The Daewoo Group was soon forced to sell its automobile division, with GM soon buying Daewoo Motors. This would eventually spell disaster for the South Korean manufacturer, as Daewoo's entire range was reduced to rebadged Chevrolets by the mid-2000s. At the end of the decade, Daewoo withdrew from overseas markets and retreated to their domestic markets. By 2016, Daewoo was replaced by GM Korea, which would begin importing GM cars into Asia and exporting GM cars produced in Asia. With all that said, Daewoo's fate was rather sad and unjustified. At least it sort of got a successor. To sum up, Daewoo was a brand killed because of financial trouble and bad management. Moving on from Daewoo, our next car company had a pretty similar fate to that of Daewoo. I'm talking about Saab. The company began as the subsidiary of an aerospace manufacturer fittingly named Saab, building fighter planes for the Swedish Air Force during World War II. The aforementioned subsidiary would become a car manufacturer in 1945, when it began a project on a small automobile design, which would later become the first Saab vehicle, the 92, launched in 1949. In 1968, the Greater Saab company would merge with Scania, creating Saab Scania. A decade later, the Saab 900 was launched and would become extremely popular, amassing a cult following. In the mid-80s, the Saab 9000 was also launched. In 1989, the automotive division of Saab Scania was spun off as an independent company. General Motors would take 50% ownership. Two models to come out of this period would be the 93 and 95. In 2000, GM bought the remaining 50% of Saab shares, making the company a wholly owned subsidiary. Soon enough, after many failed ventures trying to make the brand luxury and financial trouble, GM sold Saab to Dutch sports car maker Spyker. After his struggles for survival through 2011, Saab filed for bankruptcy. Thankfully, the Saab brand hadn't died just yet, as a newly formed Chinese company, ironically named National Electric Vehicle Sweden, or NEVS for short, bought Saab's remaining assets. This allowed them to continue production of the 93 in 2013, and NEVS would begin planning to develop new Saab branded products, only to get stopped by the Saab Aerospace company from using the Saab name. Since then, NEVS couldn't produce any new Saab branded products, with the only Saab based vehicle that they produced being an electric version of the 93, made until 2022, exclusively for the Chinese market. To sum up Saab's story, the company, like Daewoo, had a great upbringing, but failed due to financial difficulties, horrible management, and a lack of interest from possible investors. Next up is the last manufacturer for today, Rover. Launched in 1878 as a bicycle maker, Rover only became a car manufacturer in 1904 with the two-seater Rover 8. Rover didn't really have that much of a success before the 50s, and so the history of the marque before that time is rather irrelevant to us. In 1948, Rover's first notable success came in the form of the Land Rover. Initially made for the military, the Land Rover began getting sold to the public and would receive high praise. Other successful models made during that time were the P4, P5 and P6 saloons. In 1970, another new successful Rover came in the form of the Range Rover, a utility vehicle that had the off-road capabilities of the original Land Rover in a more refined package. Going slightly backwards to 1967, Rover became a part of the Leyland Motor Corporation, or LMC for short, which also owned fellow British manufacturer Triumph. Soon LMC merged with British Motor Holdings to become British Leyland. With that, Rover was now grouped together with not only Triumph, but also British Motor Holdings' Jaguar to form the performance luxury division of British Leyland. This spelled the end of the Rover company's independence, as Rover turned into what was just a brand. During the 1970s, Rover mainly made cars developed alongside Triumph, with the only authentic Rover vehicle to come out of this time period being the iconic SD1. In 1978, British Leyland created a new subsidiary for Land Rovers, spinning off the Land Rover and Range Rover ranges into their own brand. The following year, British Leyland began a long relationship with Japanese manufacturer Honda, allowing both to use each other's technology for various co-developed cars. This partnership would lead to various Rover cars, including the 200, based on the Honda Bolide, and the 416i, sold exclusively in Australia and based on the first generation Honda Integra. In 1988, the newly formed Austin Rover Group, wholly owned by British Leyland, began to solely use the Rover marque. British Leyland itself was soon renamed to the Rover Group, with the car division becoming Rover Cars. This period spawned many new Rover models, such as the 800, second generation 200, 400 and 600. The Austin Metro and Maestro would also become Rovers following Austin's merger with Morris. In 1988, the Rover Group was bought by British Aerospace, although 6 years later sold the group and its massive range of brands to BMW. Under BMW, more new cars entered the Rover lineup. These include the 75, 25 and 45. In the year 2000, BMW split up the Rover Group, selling Land Rover to Ford, retaining the Mini brand, and selling the remains of the Rover Group to a company called the Phoenix Consortium, who re-established it as MG Rover. The first new Rover car under MG Rover was the City Rover in 2003, which was a rebadged Tata Indica. The City Rover wasn't a success in the slightest, gaining horrible reception and having poor sales. The company, however, was still hoping for a success, and pitched many concept cars as teasers for a successor to the 25 and 45, but despite that, no production model ever came to being. In 2005, MG Rover production ceased, having lost over 6,000 employees. The remains of the collapsed firm were sold to the Nanjing Automobile Group. The Chinese giant proceeded to restart production on the MGTF Roadster. When it comes to Rover, another Chinese company, SAIC, announced their own version of the 75 in late 2006. However, SAIC wasn't able to do this, as BMW, which still held the rights to the Rover name, refused to sell the name. Therefore, SAIC created their own brand with a similar name and badge, Rowe. Now here's a fun fact about Rowe. The reason why SAIC named the brand Rowe, to be specific, is because that's how you'd pronounce Rover in Chinese. Moving on, Rover, since the collapse of MG Rover and its subsequent sale to SAIC and Nanjing, hasn't been used as a brand, as the brand name is still owned by BMW to this day. To finish this part of the video, I will say that it's sad that Rover no longer makes cars, as it was one of the last quintessentially British car makers that made vehicles affordable to the general public. I hope that at some point, BMW revives the Rover brand and starts making cars under it. That's all I have for you when it comes to Rover. With all that said, thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked it, and if you did, why not give a like and subscribe? This was Autofill here with you, and I hope to see you in the next video.